How much can you learn in 24 hours? Well, for me, I got 3 things to say about that. The first, I'm very slow at learning. It takes me forever to pick up new things. Number 2, I get distracted very easily. It's very difficult for me to stay focused and learn for a long period of time. What were we talking about? Anyways, I was working on a project where I knew I would be using Redis. Now, Redis is most commonly known as an in-memory cache, which will allow your application to be very quick, and it could potentially save you money if you don't have to hit a traditional database. So here's the goal. I want to learn Redis in 24 hours. I've never used it before. Will I master Redis? Probably not. In fact, I'll probably just lightly scratch the surface, because as mentioned, my rate of learning is very slow, and it's very difficult for me to stay on a single task for a long period of time. But in 24 hours, you can learn a lot of crap. And I'm going to be splitting this up over a couple of days, so that way I don't have to completely roast my brain, because after 4 hours, I'm done. I'm not going to be learning. And at that point, I'm probably just wasting my time and your time. So stay tuned for those in the upcoming episode. So be sure you subscribe for that, and stay tuned. Now, I believe the best way to learn is to learn from somebody. I don't really buy into the whole self-taught thing because most people are going to learn from someone, whether that's through videos, through books, or documentation. My approach for this is going to be to start with a Redis course, and I'm going to be supplementing that with any kind of material that I feel I need to learn a little bit in more depth. So documentation, YouTube videos. I won't be using any books, but I might just be using various articles on the internet. And for everything we learn, we want to do some hands-on examples so that we can really drill that into our brain and get some practical experience. So if everything in these 24 hours goes good, which it probably won't, probably end in disaster, but let's just say it does go good, I'll have a pretty decent understanding of Redis and improve my overall application development skills, because this is a very valuable skill to make production applications. Plus, there's a lot more with Redis beyond just the basic caching, so we're going to discover all that stuff in this video as well, if we have time. Hello, Frank Kane. You're going to be my sensei for this video. So here we have a 2-hour free course, which is an overview of Redis and the different Redis capabilities beyond caching. And this is great because honestly, the courses that are 300 hours long do not interest me. I'd much rather have a 2-hour course that gives me everything I need than a 30-hour course with only 2 hours of information. So let's get started with lesson 1. So the notes I got from lesson 1 is that Redis acts as a caching layer between the application and the database. This means you can access the database only when you need to grab something that is infrequently used and has not been cached yet, or if you need to update the database values. In addition to being the layer between the application and the database, it can also act as a database itself, so you might not even need that traditional database. Redis helps avoid vendor lock-in as it's open source and on all major cloud platforms, and it helps reduce total skill set required to build an application if you end up using Redis to do some of these other things you might need to do, such as act as the database itself. Then you don't have to have an expert in potentially Redis and an expert in whatever database you might be using. Beyond Redis core, there are tons of different things that Redis can do, such as Redis search, Redis JSON, Redis graph, Redis AI. It's pretty overwhelming, all the different things that can be done with Redis. For example, with Redis graph, this could potentially replace a graph database like Neo4j. Now, the actual sponsor of this video has nothing to do with databases, but I still think a lot of you will find it very interesting, and that is Crypto.com. Insert amazing Crypto.com ad here. Now, I use Crypto.com for their Visa Crypto Rewards debit card. So this is a prepaid debit card that you can get cash back in crypto with any purchase that you make, as well as a lot of potential perks, such as, for me, I get free Spotify. And that depends on which card tier you get, but you can start with a free card, or if you stake $400 worth of their Kronos cryptocurrency, you'll get a $25 bonus, as will I. So to do that, you can sign up with the referral code Caleb. I use the Crypto.com debit card for pretty much everything, and you can see just endless rewards anytime I make a purchase, and this really does add up. One Kronos is worth 40 cents at the time of this recording, so I'm getting hundreds and hundreds of dollars back in crypto rewards. And you can see here's an example where I got the entire Spotify purchase back. So if you already have Spotify, you could be saving money using the Crypto.com debit card. Now, this is primarily an app that you can get in the App Store or the Play Store, but you can learn about the different offerings they have at Crypto.com. You can see they got this really cool video here, which, maybe if the sponsorship goes well, I'll be on this video someday. We'll see, maybe not, but you can go to their products and see that they have the metal Visa cards with up to 8% back on all spending. And here are the different tiers. So you can start off with the Midnight Blue for $0 or go up to the Ruby Steel for $400 and get 2% back on all purchases. If you go up to the Jade or Green, you can get 100% off Netflix as well. So if you want to support this channel, well, then it would be awesome if you would check out the Ruby debit card and the potential savings you could be having. I'll leave a link down in the pinned comment. Give it a shot. It's also a fabulous way to expose yourself to new cryptocurrencies and start learning about the world of DeFi and decentralized applications. So thank you, Crypto.com. Now let's get back to the Redis stuff, which I got a little distracted, but I warned you guys. Distractions, it's core to my being, and you just got to embrace that, Distractions are part of the learning process sometimes, but we got to do our best to focus, so let's get back to it. All right, at this point, I am 4 videos in. So far, the explanations have been fabulous, to the point, not wasting any time. Now, this can sometimes lead to quickly going over something without an in-depth explanation, which I was a little confused between the difference of set and H-set. So I did a little extra research on that. Essentially, H-set can allow you to better categorize your data and gives you a way to fully qualify your data and organize it in different groups, such as in this case, captains. But the general idea is it's a key value pair. So in this example, the key is foo and the value is bar. So when you try to get foo, you will get the response bar. It works pretty similar to key value pairs in JSON data or dictionaries in Python, if you're familiar. And overall, it's not too crazy. Here's a quick example that I created where I import Redis, which I installed as pip install Redis. I created a Redis object and assigned it to the variable R. And this takes the password, host, port, and this decode responses, which will make things readable. I got all that information from the Redis cloud, so you can see your endpoint here and the port. And then we also have the password down here as well. Once I connected, I was able to set an example. So we set the key as name and the value as Caleb. And then when I get that data, we get Caleb back. Now, my first big newbie mistake here was that I started with a file called redis.py because that seems to make, pretty good sense, but not realizing that that would cause a module naming conflict. So when I tried to import Redis, things just broke. To see this, I will save it as redis.py and run, and we get an error saying that this partially initialized module Redis has no attributes Redis. So if you get that error, stop being a noob like me and name your files right. So don't name your files the same as any of your modules. So come up with a really good creative name, such as redisexample.py. Much better. Now this issue is still going to happen if you have that Redis file in the same directory still, because it searches through the existing directory for that module. So we'll just want to obliterate that file altogether. So take that, and we will delete, move to trash. And that'll magically fix all your problems. And we can validate this data by connecting through the CLI as well and saying get name. And we get the value Caleb, so this data is in fact stored in the Redis cache online. Then I got distracted listening to techno. And then I watched some guides. At this point I was getting a little tired. But I watched some guides, mages, and minotaurs, some Redis videos on the internet. Then I fell asleep. After dreaming about doing something else with my life, I woke up and got back to studying. I read some about hash sets and this colon naming convention. So you have the ability to prefix with something which will further qualify whatever your key is, which will allow you to do some more advanced sorting and so forth in the future. You can see here namespacing it with the user prefix, we instantly know which information this hash should or could have. So it's not a big concern for us now because we're not really doing much, but if we had a really complex system, we might need a way to organize the data that's being stored in the cache. Now, after completing section 2 of the Udemy course, we learned about Redis streams, pub sub, which are slightly different, but this is a system that will allow you to broadcast a message and consume that message. So you could have 2 Python applications, for example, or 2 any language applications, one writing data and one reading data. Pub sub is more like on the fly, the message is broadcast and it's either accepted or not, whereas the streams will actually be saved, so you have that history of all the messages and the data is not lost. So this is the first additional feature to Redis beyond the caching that I learned about. Not something I'm going to be using right now, but it's good to know of. So this essentially exists as a potential replacement to tools like Kafka, which is great because I've never used Kafka before, so I probably don't need to worry about this tool right now, but I know it's there and I have it in the back of my mind. Now, the only complaint I have about the course so far, and it's nothing against the instructor, it's just that there's a heavy use of downloaded files, which for some reason I just hate doing. I don't know if I'm just lazy, but I like to build everything from scratch. So I would much prefer a 3-hour course than a 2-hour course with downloadable resources. I'd rather have a 3-hour course where you actually build those things and not having to download a bunch of stuff. Because then I just kind of feel like code just comes out of nowhere and you have to like figure out what's going on, and it doesn't give you a natural way to figure out how to do that on your own from scratch. But that's just my personal taste, and I don't think this is a universal thing. You know, some people prefer that pre-made code so they can just take parts of it and use it in their projects. Whereas when I'm following a course, I like to follow it as if I'm just starting from nothing and building up to some knowledge that I need, which is generally how I try to keep my videos on this channel, just starting from scratch. But occasionally you do need to have downloadable resources, and it's definitely a common thing for Udemy courses, especially courses that do a pretty big overview where, you know, you might not want to spend an hour or two building some streaming application. But anyways, I'm rambling. The TLDR of streams is that it allows one application to send data as a stream of information, which can then be consumed in another application, and the data is persisted and queryable. And that is the end of day one. And I'm kind of exhausted, and I don't really feel like I learned a whole lot, but more than I knew yesterday, so that's good. So it's day 2, and I'm dying inside, but we're going to get on to learning, and we're going to start with actually doing some hands-on practice. So I built this sample application in an earlier video, and this will basically allow, well, no, not my name. So we'll put in a movie name such as Batman, and then we'll choose a file such as batman.jpg and upload this data, hit submit. And I know this application is very sexy, but now we should be able to visit /movies/9, I think will be the ID. And there we go, we get the Batman movie. And you can't see it here, but if you look over in the running server, you'll get this little message DB, which comes from this message on line 18. So basically the process here, and if you're not familiar with Django, that's okay. I'll just go through this real quick. If you are familiar with Django, just have some patience here. But we have this, which will allow us to pass in a movie ID and get that movie. We have the ability here to pass in a movie ID, and we'll issue cache.get for that ID. If the movie is found, we'll print cache. It didn't print cache, it printed DB. So if it's not found, because it's not in the cache, what we'll do is we'll get that object from our local database, not from Redis. If it exists, we'll add that to the cache where the ID is the key and the movie object is the value. And then we'll render that page. So the first time running this, we get it from the database. And what should have happened is that should have been set to the movie ID in the cache. So now when I go back to the page, issue a quick refresh, we go back to the terminal, the second time it gets it from the cache. This is cool. This is my first time seeing Redis in action with an actual application that I was working on. This could potentially be faster and potentially save me money, depending on if Redis ends up being cheaper than my database. So if you want to copy this code, the one thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to import from django.core.cache import cache. And this is going to come from settings.py, where I set all the cache information here. And I set the location URL to look like this, where we have the username default, then the password at the endpoint, which I got from the cloud, :port. Sweet. And to use this, I installed Redis 4.1.4 using pip install Redis. So after countless hours of confusion and pulling my hair out, I realized something wasn't right with my caching, because when I went to the terminal and issued keys asterisk, I didn't get those values that I was caching in Django. And it turns out Django has some default caching options, and I don't think it was pulling from my settings correctly. So what I ended up doing is creating a default, which, I could have just left this information blank, and then I created one that said Redis, and I was able to be a little bit more specific and grab the Redis cache. And now when I retrieve data and issue keys asterisk, you can see we have new data. So that took me entirely too long to figure out, and I'm not entirely sure why the default wouldn't go ahead and grab this default one here. But to show you exactly what I mean, you can get rid of this entirely, save that, and over in our views, we'll just get rid of this and import cache, and we're still able to hit a cache from Django. So Django has some built-in cache options, and the default options do not use Redis, but I feel like there should be a way to have it automatically grab that default key if you do it that way. Anywho, I find that development is like 90% trying to figure out one little issue and 10% actually learning important stuff. But I guess all those issues are important too. If you're watching this and you don't use Django, you're probably like, oh, this is totally useless to me. But I'm just showing you what I'm learning. So far, so good. I spent day 3 familiarizing myself with the JSON persistent data store. Basically an alternative to a database. You can just use Redis itself. This was right around the time when Redis Stack was released, which I did a brief video on. This basically just combines all the different features of Redis into a single product instead of having separate modules. Not really a huge change when it comes to the actual product, more just like a nice marketing change just to have everything under one software product. This did require some minor changes, specifically brew install Redis Stack as opposed to just Redis. First learned by using the JSON store with Redis which is an object mapper. So basically you create objects in code, Python for example, and then you can take your Python objects and have those saved to records in the database as JSON. And the fact that they're JSON means you can have nested objects. So if you have an object that has multiple objects for attributes, well, that's all going to be able to be stored in a single record. So that's what I spent most of my day on day 3 studying and prepping that video that I released on Redis Stack, which here's a little bit more of what I did for that video. Here I am in Python, and we define our data structure as classes. So we can have an address and a customer, where a customer has information as well as an address. We can create a customer, and in this case we just assign it to a variable Andrew. We assign values for all of these, including creating a new object for the address, and then we issue .save on that object. And then here's some additional code that you could use to retrieve data. To say, hey, we want to connect to our cloud Redis instance, we can set an environment variable called Redis URL and then our connection string. And now we can run our application. However, before this, we can add .all or .first to just grab a single instance. Running this, you can see it spits back the primary key right here on line 51, and then the entire object printed out from line 53. This is also when I used Redis Insight, which is the GUI tool for Redis, so you can go into your database and get a nice visual for all the database records and seeing the data that they have. This can also be used for other tools. So for example, if you go over into the workbench, you can see visuals for graph databases, time series, and some other stuff in here as well. So that's pretty sick. But at this point, I was pretty sick of Redis, but I decided to keep learning more instead of letting the learning drag on for days and days and days. So at this point, I learned 3 useful tools I could add to my toolbox, which is the JSON store, Redis Insight, and it's gone. Oh, Redis my brain's a little fried. I'm not very good at this stuff, but I'm still gonna keep going. So next up, learn about searching, and we see this example in this code here where I'm searching for a customer with the address, specifically the city of Pittsburgh. And it's pretty cool because you can see we can chain, wrong city in this comment, ignore that. That was from the documentation. We can use the dot operator to traverse down into these different objects. So the customer, and then into address, and then into city, Pittsburgh. So we can do fairly complex search, not just equals equals, but you could do less than and greater than. And this all comes down to the columns that you index. So you can see we put a lot of indexes on here, and you can see the city is indexed. So those indexes allow us to do those queries. Being able to do this is very important because if you have complex objects with nested objects like this, searching through that can be fairly difficult. So adding the indexes allows us to query on some nested attribute based on being equal to some value or greater than or less than some value. And a similar concept with the time series database. If you imagine one of these attributes being a time frame or a timestamp, then you could query based on a specific time range. I went through pretty much the rest of the Udemy course. I didn't do everything in depth, just kind of watched it and put in my brain that I knew these different options were available. So if I'm ever creating some application and I'm like, I wish I had something that could do this, well then I know of more possible solutions and I can go learn those things in depth. So now I know a little bit more about graph databases and time series and all these other different things that Redis does. I haven't used graph databases beyond just for learning's sake. I've tested a little bit with Neo4j, but the idea is it'll allow you to visualize the association between data. So this is actually one of my favorite topics back in college in discrete math, the whole graph theory where you can represent data as nodes and how the data is connected with lines between these nodes or edges. And this will allow you to visualize and also compute difficult problems such as how to get from one node to another node very far away using the shortest path. And if you think about these different edges having some cost, maybe distance, then you can do those calculations with a graph database. You can think of this as, for example, Google Maps or Apple Maps. You have a city and another city, and we want to figure out the best solution, the best path to get there. They might do something that you could do in a graph database. Now, I've never actually built these tools, so I don't know exactly what they do, but that's just an example. And this pairs nicely with Redis Insight, allowing you to visualize the nodes. So that's pretty cool. And it's powered by GraphPlus, whatever that is. So you can learn more about the technical stuff if you're into that. All right, I think I've made 24 hours. Haven't kept perfect track, but it's been roughly 24 hours over the course of a couple of days. And this has been a good experience. I got a pretty deep understanding of the caching and some of the JSON store info, and then scratched the surface of a bunch of the other Redis tools. I think there's a lot here, and it would probably take a lot longer to really understand all this stuff in depth. But now when people say Redis, I'm not scared. I understand what Redis is, and I could know where to start looking for stuff if I needed some solution. So thank you for watching. Hopefully this was fun. If you want to see me do this with some other tech or maybe following a certain YouTube channel for 24 hours, drop a comment in the comments section below with suggestions. Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for upcoming episodes. And we might put some Redis content in my back end course, which I've been working on. So if you're interested in getting early access to the notes for that for free, check out the pinned comment where I'll have a link to the notes. That's all I got for this one. Stay tuned for the upcoming episodes. Peace out.